Welcome, everyone, to another amazing episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. I am super delighted as I have just an amazing rock star joining us in the ring today. We are going to go a few rounds and have that really deep, courageous, connected conversation because remember, this is always our space to look at leadership a little bit differently. It's about how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility inside that space. So with that, first, let me just say welcome to the amazing and beautiful Alison Donaghey. I think I said it wrong again, right?
That's right. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, we are thrilled to have you today. And so just so you know a little bit about Alison's background and know who we've got playing in space with us today, let me just tell you a little bit about her. She is a cause and effect strategist, speaker, author, and radio host. It is her mission to empower and activate people to think opposite, to suspend their belief, consider the opposite, proceed with perspective, to better live their lives, businesses, and the planet because of unexamined perspective, which she has found to be a deadly virus. I would agree. We get stuck in our perspectives all the time. For it is not global warming, war, or famine that will be humanity's downfall, but our growing polarization and inability to consider a different perspective. How powerful is that? Talk about redefining leadership, right? And Alison, I know when it comes to looking at perspective, there's a lot of amazing work that you've been doing, a lot of amazing work that's on the horizon. And right now you're actually stepping into a different conversation around changing perspective and what that means. So tell us a little bit about what you've got going on.
Yeah, sure. I'm just wanting to try to make sure I'm looking at you here. I'm feeling like my eyes are all over the place. Sorry about that. Well, thank you so much again for having me. It's an absolute delight to be here. And so it's so interesting the way that things unfold. And I think it's so important sometimes to roll with those punches. And when the universe is telling you something in a really big way, at some point, I think it's important to go, oh, maybe I should listen. So that's what I've done. So my backstory is I was a single mom on welfare. I started my own company. I was a house painting company. So it was in a male-dominated industry. In fact, 84% of people that are painters now are men. And through that, I just really fell in love with business. And I really believe that business is a way to change the world. And so I wrote a book called Think Opposite, where I just sort of break down this book based on why you're doing what you're doing, and not in the big why sense, but more in the sense of why is somebody a barista at Starbucks as opposed to Tim Hortons? Because those are two very, very different personality types, and we're drawn towards one over the other. So sometimes we think why is tied to our passion, and we can't figure out our passion, so then we're left in this space of feeling kind of yuck about not being able to nail it. But if we start understanding why we're doing this instead of that, then we can build our whole business around this instead of that. It keeps us in line, and then we're able to communicate with our staff, our customers, and our community as a whole. So as business, I absolutely love business. I was quite happy going down this path. And then earlier this year, I gave a speech called #MyPart, where I talked about the importance of I always starting with our part in any situation. And I refer back to when I was sexually assaulted in high school and the #MeToo movement, and really looking at, is this helping? Is it hurting? Is it making things more confusing? And it was when I accepted my part in that experience, was I able to actually find true empowerment.
Right.
That's not to blame the victim. It's not to excuse the bad behavior. It's not to let him off the hook. It has nothing to do with him really at all. It has to do with me and my relationship with it.
Exactly.
Yes,
and that's really powerful. And it's interesting that you say that for a couple reasons. One, it's one of the catalysts that got my business really exploded was when I responded to an article that CNN had posted, a blog post, and mine went viral. And so the producer called me, and it was that same thing because I had talked about habits that I had taken on as a coping strategy for abuse I had suffered as a child. Right. And what was the differentiator for them was I was the only person that showed my ownership in the decisions I made post that incident happening. And it's so powerful because I was just listening to, and I'm a big Soul Sunday junkie, I was watching an episode with Maya Angelou and Oprah before Maya had passed. And Maya had talked about, even in terms of abuse, that it's not the abuse itself. It's not the incident. It's the story and the participation in the abuse. That is where we get, shut down. And for whatever happened, whether you were the victim or whether you were the perpetrator, there is an ownership along the way. And I think there's so much, and talk about responsibility, right? That is such a place to step forward as a leader to say, I recognize this. I own my part. I love hashtag my part. Because without you owning it, nothing changes, right?
Yeah, for sure. It becomes one of those things. And, and I've started it, but I believe that hashtag my part belongs to everybody. Agreed. And I encourage people to use it however, whenever they can, because I think it does have a really powerful message behind it. We want to say, well, I'm responsible. As a woman, I am responsible, but I'm not willing to take responsibility for anything I did before now.
Right. And the thing is, and to your point, and here's the power, because I really, when the whole Me Too campaign came out, I was torn on both sides of it. Because you can resonate. I don't think there's a woman who hasn't had something that they can say, Me Too.
Right.
But it was the part around, what are we doing to change that, to create accountability, to take responsibility? And what I love that you said that I think is so incredibly powerful, you taking ownership of your part does not condone, excuse, justify. It does not do anything to the perpetrator that created the situation. It does not dismiss that in any way, shape, or form. What it does is it gives you back your sense, which I do believe empowerment is an intrinsic thing. It's like being motivated. No one can give you a space of empowerment. It is something you have to claim and take back for yourself. And the only way you can do it, it's like forgiveness, right? Forgiveness has nothing to do with the other person. Nothing. It's about your peace. The same thing with that ownership, because I do think the only way you can truly have forgiveness is to have your ownership of the part. And so that's the piece that I want to make sure everyone hears is, we're not saying that condones the behavior or the situation or the abuse or it's not that. It's to separate yourself from that and take claim of what's yours to own in that space.
For sure. Yeah. And I know in every fiber of my being, there's going to be still people who listen to it and not hear what you just clarified.
Oh, absolutely. And there's going to be people right now that are triggered. There are going to be people that are vehemently disagreeing or finding themselves wanting to say a lot of different things, may even be screaming at us right now saying, F you, this, whatever, I don't buy into it. And that's okay. Because one of the things, and we've discussed this even on another show, is that opportunity when that trigger is showing up for you, you have two choices in that space. You can participate with the trigger and continue to let it perpetuate and let yourself have that emotional journey that's attached to it, or you can pause and acknowledge the trigger and be curious about where that trigger is coming from and step forward into whatever fear and whatever story and whatever stuff, to what Alison's saying, take your ownership in it and say, then what do I wish to do because this trigger is firing right now? It's a because conversation and an and conversation. Some of you might be like, I'm done and just, get off the show right now. That's your choice.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate, because somebody said to me the other day, just because you're offended doesn't mean you're right.
Right.
And I just thought, whoa, that is like such a great thing to keep in mind. So when somebody's mad at us, we can think that as well. Just because they're offended doesn't mean they're right. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm right either.
Right. But, and you being right doesn't make me wrong. Exactly. And here's the other thing, and I just had tremendous resistance back in the corporate space as we were having a powerful conversation around being offended. And you truly, not in any way, shape, or form, can be offended without you choosing to be offended. No one can offend you without your permission. And I had someone push back and said, well, if someone were to say something to my wife, then it's my duty to step up. I said, you're choosing to participate. Because what happens when we don't internalize what someone else says, by the way, anything said is a data point, right? And when you don't internalize it, you leave two options. Either they project to somebody else, or they change how they're showing up with you because they want to engage. And everything that you're saying is that space of someone being offended doesn't make you wrong. Someone choosing, because the other thing is, and this is where I would love to dig into a little bit with you, because I know you're all about changing perspective, right? Yes. It's all about thinking opposite. We get so, and I love that you say humanity's downfall is the polarization, and it's the space of being adamant about my position is right.
Yes.
Because I feel the biggest thing that gets in most people's way is making assumptions and hearing through our filter and not knowing how to remove our filter to hear something different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so talk a little bit about that work and how this is applying with what you're moving forward.
Well, I do use that method called think opposite, where if I'm getting offended by something, I can stop and go, okay, what is the exact opposite of what I'm thinking right now? So I always use, and anybody who's heard me speak before has heard me say this, you're driving down the road, some guy's tailgating you. This is something we can all relate to. And you can go, oh my God, he's such a jerk, and why is he tailgating me? And you can like go off and make up all of this anger story around it. Or you can say, oh, maybe he's in a hurry to go to the hospital because he just got a call from his mother.
Right.
Both are stories.
Right.
One will serve you well and one won't.
Yeah. And so likely neither one of them are true.
Right. But if you take the opposite, that he's not a jerk, what would the opposite be? That he was a really good man. And what would a really good man be tailgating you for? It must be an emergency.
Right.
So our reaction to him changes. So we're less likely to play that break game with him, trying to get him to tailgate us or to rear end us. When we go to work or wherever we're going, we're not going to say to the people there, guess what happened to me on the way to work? You know, there was this jerk and he was behind me and this is what he did. And I don't, you know, drivers are so bad these days. And then somebody else is going to join in with their bad drive story. And then it's just going to balloon into this, all drivers are bad. But if you think, I should get out of his way because he's having an emergency, and you pull over, maybe it's an opportunity to actually hear what's on the radio and say, oh, I love this song. And you get to work and you're like, oh my God, I heard this song on the way to work. It took me back to high school. And totally different energy for the entire rest of the day. And all it was about the story you were making up about somebody. So when somebody hears me talking about my part or the explanation that you were given or anything here, and they're getting upset by it, they have that option of going, whoa, what if they're right?
Right.
Right. And then start there and go, okay, well, this part feels like it's wrong, but this part feels like maybe there's some truth in it.
Right.
Right. Then we can start actually having a more responsible conversation with ourselves about what we really believe in, because most of our beliefs are not even ours.
Thank you.
Like they come from the media, they come from our parents, they come from our grandparents, they come from our school friends, they come from our teachers.
I say we hand them down as a generational legacy.
That's right. Yeah, we talk about money being inheritance.
We inherit fear and stories and beliefs. And I just had a conversation with a client even yesterday who was saying, well, you know, that's going to be a really long process to change my beliefs. I said, that's another story you're telling yourself. It can be as simple as you saying, that story no longer serves. Imagine if I believe something else. And it's literally changing. If you can get your belief and emotion behind the new frame that you're talking about. And I love that space of opposite, because if you really believe in your heart of heart, and I do a lot of, you know, work with Brene Brown and studying her stuff. And I love that she talks about shame and vulnerability, but she talks about, imagine if every single person was coming from the best place they could with what they have in that moment. Yeah. If you truly buy into that, it changes your perspective on everything, because most of the time, because think about, we all can be assholes. We all can be jerks. We can all do different things.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes a function of the environment we're in, the context, not getting enough sleep. This is happening. My parent just got sick. I'm losing, you know, getting in a divorce, whatever. There's always these circumstances and environmental things that sometimes pull us out of being present and cause us in a space to react. How many times have you been in a situation where someone says something to you or asks you something, that one moment you say something, but if they would have waited 2 hours, your response would have been different because you were so caught up in what. Imagine if everybody else is going through that same process every day. Doesn't it let us offer a little bit more compassion and grace?
Yeah. Yeah, but sadly, it's so easy for us to let ourselves off the hook with something like that. Oh, I shouldn't have said it. I just had a bad day. But we're not willing to let the other person off the hook with it, right? And that's where the whole my part comes in too. Like, if we start understanding first that we drove ourselves to whatever situation we were in, one way or another. So people have the argument, well, a young child doesn't do that. But then we get to decide where that bus is taking us for the rest of our life. Like, once we become an adult and we're able to make decisions and choices, we are now responsible for how we respond to that. The other line of thinking is, and people who are a little bit more woo-woo will think that our soul chose that path. So that terrible thing that happened to us when we were 2, our soul chose that in order for us to have the experience we're supposed to have as an adult. So I think whether that's true or not, it's such an easier place to come from.
Right.
And it's easier to go, okay, so instead of being angry and mad about all of that stuff that's happening, what can I take from that? So had that experience of being assaulted in high school had not happened, I would not be able to talk about the #MeToo movement the way I am.
Right.
Right?
Right. Absolutely.
And it's important to talk about that because, like, the second part, the main thing that happened to me this year that has changed my focus into men's rights and feminism is the Tony Robbins experience, where he was, he had done, did you hear that about that? The #MeToo comment that he made?
No, I didn't.
Totally blew up. He had said it was a great movement, did lots of great things, but when we stay in the victimization of it, it hurts us.
And agree. I personally agree with that.
Yes. And I'm not even a fan of his. And that's one of the first things and I thought, this is great. And then a woman got on board with it and got pissed off and challenged him and did YouTube and did all of this other stuff. And he had to recant. And sadly, the real tragedy is he recanted all of it.
See, that's the part that honestly, that troubles me more than any energy that comes out of it.
Yeah.
Because that's part of where I find the opportunity is that people do not feel that they can say what they need to say.
Yeah. And those are
and not feel like they have to recant it back because somebody chose to get offended.
Right. Right. And it was a woman getting offended at a man. If a man got offended at a woman, it probably wouldn't have gone very far.
Right.
Right. And so that
is a contradiction in a lot of different spaces.
Yeah. And then I had a guy on my radio show, Aaron, who talked about when he was raped. And I thought, oh, wow, this is interesting coming from a female listening to a man's perspective.
Right.
And then there was this nagging thing that was in the back of my head for the next couple of days where I was thinking, but men can handle it. Not my proudest moment. And I'm not even quite sure it was a thought. It was more of a nagging. I think it's in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I have a son.
Sort of a belief that might have been handed down somewhere.
Right. And I was talking to a friend of mine and they said actually women are biologically programmed to protect their daughters, or maybe even socially, I forget what he said, to protect their daughters more than they protect their sons because they have to toughen their sons up. Yeah. So I don't know, maybe I would have treated anybody that way. I'm not sure, but it did get me thinking about what is my part in how this man experienced his rape.
Yeah.
Because we have a collective consciousness. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say it's interesting because I remember I have a friend of mine who recently wrote a book and really created a national movement and message around the same kind of situation. He was abused as a child and it was very shaming for him because there wasn't a space where he felt he could really share that and talk about it. And I remember having a similar reaction to what you're talking about, that I had to work through my own limiting beliefs that I was basically had bought into. I was given, they've been passed on who knows how many generations and just culturally. Mm-hmm. And to say, wow, where is that belief coming from? And do I honestly believe that women deserve to have a voice in this space and men don't, and they should be more resilient? And it really, I had to not even break down the idea of abuse in either space, but even the whole emotional intelligence around, we still have a culture that says women are allowed to do this emotionally, men are not. Women cannot be strong, men can. We have such dichotomies and contradictions, and we're still teaching our children that belief and perspective that says, instead of looking individually at someone to say, what do you need to heal? If
Mhm.
this is, even if, because I look at, even I've even had to question, and not that in any way, shape, or form do I question my relationship with my dad and the abuse and other abuses I've had in my life. But I also go back and I think about that comment from Maya Angelou, and I'm like, how much of that incident was the incident, and how much is the story that I've just continued to tell? Because sometimes I sit and say, how much of that really happened versus how much of that did I create? And it doesn't take away from the fact that the incidents themselves happen, but the magnitude, the degree, the way I chose to respond to them, all of that had a domino effect in other choices and other things I made in my life. And so I think it's interesting that you had that awakening or awareness, because it's, talk about throwing responsibility in your face, right?
Oh, yeah. Like it was, I'm still kind of reeling from it. And I think, what you were saying too about the stories that we tell ourselves, they're so impacted too on the people around us. So I was talking to somebody the other day about my part, about what had happened. And she said to me, she goes, well, I'm going to do some personal coaching with you right now. You need to find that guy. You need to phone that guy, and you need to tell him. And I said, I don't need to do that. Like, I don't know why you need me to do that, but I don't need to do that. So if I was a different person, or if it was a different setting, maybe I was out with friends having a couple of drinks and somebody got in on that and somebody else said, you really should call him. Maybe I'd have been calling him. Like, I'd like to think I wouldn't, but we end up in these different situations where other people get involved in our story and then start telling us how to respond. And then where is the accountability there? Yeah. It's, right? And then I wonder how much of this has to do with the fact that we treat men like they're disposable. Like and I'm really, really starting to grasp the truth of that. I just finished reading a book called The Myth of Male Power. And I think it should be a required reading for absolutely every feminist.
Well, it's interesting because I'm reading Lewis Howes' Mask of Masculinity, and it talks about that's another one I really believe, because there isn't enough work done in the space to talk about. There's all these layers we're not getting into, because I think even the fact that you talk about men's rights and feminism, because I feel like we tend to overcorrect in whatever focus we're in, whether it's Black Lives Matter, feminist this, Me Too, and we lose sight of having an inclusive conversation. We keep further polarizing and dividing and creating these very divisive, that's not even a word, whatever, I will make up words, lines between them and us. We're still too much in the they and us conversation instead of the we collective and the I and me and you, and it's just, there's
I think we have more segregation now than we did back in slavery. At least it was clear, and I'm not saying at least as if it was a good thing, but there was this clear cut kind of thing. Then, Rosie Parks happened, and everybody was able to ride anywhere on the bus. And then we thought segregation was over. Right? And it's worse now, I think, because we're doing it with everything. We're doing it with boys and girls and gender and age and race and religion and all of that stuff. And, that we have this term equality, and in a social sense, I'm not sure we can achieve equality, because we are all so very different. So if you have a burning building, will a woman be able to take a man out the same as a man would? Probably not. It can happen, but probably not. In which case, we're not the same. So we talk about equality and our brain goes, but we're not the same. And so we're automatically bumping up against this word on some level internally going, it doesn't fit. But if we could actually move to a place of valuing everybody and seeing that everybody plays an intrinsic part in the success and the failure of society as a whole. And I it chose me, the whole gender conversation. But I think the beautiful part of talking about gender is we are all either one or the other. When it comes to some of the other things, there's multiple groups and it might be harder. But if I can treat every man and woman in front of me with value, their race and religion stops mattering.
It does. And it comes back to fundamentally, love changes everything. If
Yeah.
you look at everyone, and this is where, and I have people that push back constantly. And I mean, I started out my career as an engineer, and they'll often say, how does an engineer become a coach and doing this space? And now I'm even a, master level certified practitioner in law of attraction, which I'll laugh because people are like, Candy, that's so woo woo. I'm like, no, it's actually physics. It's physics. I know you want to put it in a category of woo woo because that means then it's hands off and you get to not have your part to take ownership in that. But It really is physics. It's just like gravity. The law of attraction is exactly like the law of gravity. You can't see it, you can't touch it, and it's physics. It is there whether you want to believe it or not. And I love that Joe Vitale said it. He goes, whether you believe or not in the law of attraction, it still is a fundamental universal truth. There is, it just is. And so when you start to think about this space of love, real love, and understanding, and whatever your beliefs are in, if you truly believe that we all came from something bigger, then we are all a part of that something bigger. And I love the way that Wayne Dyer always says, if you take a piece of pie from an apple pie, you still have an apple pie. That if we all are part of the same, then how can we be different in that respect? Because you do take all of the filters, because what we've created is this, and I agree with you, I think there's more separation and more segregation now, and we're doing it in a very passive aggressive, very blame centric, very unaccountable, not taking responsibility, entitlement way. And I think it's so interesting, this discussion around entitlement that's only directed at the youth, when all I keep saying is, who do you think taught them that?
Right?
Who is teaching that in every day when you're like, well, they aren't doing this. They aren't this. How dare they?
Yes.
And you wonder why our children are learning it.
But that's been the same conversation for generations with women, with parents and teenagers.
Right.
Right? It's that, oh, those horrible teenagers, my teenager, right?
These days.
I remember my son was like 13 and he was laying on the couch and I came home from work early and he's just watching a show. He's not doing anything wrong. And I remember my poor son, I must sound like the worst mother on the planet, but he's amazing. He's fantastic. But I remember looking at him and I went, ew. And I thought, where the hell did that come from? He didn't do anything. He didn't say anything. He's just like, hey, Mom. And I went, ew. And I knew at that point that it was whatever was going to happen in his teenage years was my fault too. Like I was playing a part in that. And I couldn't just point the finger at him and blame him for being a teenager.
Right.
And when I see the clients of mine doing it with their teenagers, I'm like, you raised them.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. We're so quick to get in the blame game. And I talk to people about that because we talk about, feedback and feedback rich environments and cultures. And I'm like, yes. And before you're so willing to offer that feedback, the first question you need to ask yourself is, how am I doing with that myself? Yeah. Because more times than not, it's not feedback we're offering. It's a projection of our own shit we're not willing to deal with. Mm-hmm. And I say that in a very loving and respected space, and to hold people accountable and have that kind of boot in the butt moment to say, look, the reality is most people, their feedback is not with the intention to serve that other person. It actually is because something they're doing is triggering for you and you don't want to deal with your own. So therefore you want someone else to fix it.
Yeah.
Just know that that's my part of ownership most people are not taking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Well said.
So talk about then, because we're going into this kind of setting the current state of where things are at right now. And there's a lot going on. There is so much that's an opportunity for us to step forward as leaders, to step forward as people who are creating real change and having big conversations. So as you start to think out on the horizon of this new found focus that said, Alison, this is where you're standing up. This is where you need to be. Mm-hmm. What is the big imagine if? What's the possibilities that you can start to visualize on opening as a result of you and this My Part movement, and what's opening up around men's right and feminism and how those two things are playing together?
Mm-hmm. Well, my big vision is to just reduce some of that polarization. If we can all take one or two steps towards the opposite perspective, I think we would do so much better as a society. I would love to see the male-female conversation just not exist with that same level of negativity and anger. There are groups of men out there, men going their own way. and they want nothing to do with women.
Right.
Nothing at all. And when you're reading some of these posts, and I'm thinking, oh my God, they hate us. Right? And some of them do, but is it undeserving? Right? It's, and it would be so nice if we could figure out a way, like, we're supposed to live together. We were created to live together, like, or to function together. And when I mean live together, I don't mean like all of us in the same house. I mean like live on this planet.
Thank you. Because I gotta say, as someone who likes my space. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes. And I am chronically single. So I'm very protective of, which is, it's a whole other conversation as well around that. But I just want more dialogue happening. I see in the future as having to be able to have more of those tough conversations, like talking about what's important to the other side in a way that we can bridge that gap.
Yeah. So having that very open, courageous, inclusive conversation, I think that's the thing. We show up not willing to listen from an open heart and an open place of understanding. We come with our own biases and our own perceived truths. And I always find that word truth to be so interesting, because I think for every person that's so adamant about what is true, I think it's the most subjective word we have on our planet is the word truth, because there is no truth. There are some universal truths, such as we need oxygen to live and those things. But a truth is nothing more than a belief with emotion behind it in the way that we show up and dictate.
And from our limited perspective.
Right.
Right? Like
the most subjective thing on the planet.
Yeah. Did you ever see that movie Vantage Point?
No, I have not.
Forrest Whitaker, I think, was in it.
I love him.
It showed one incident that happened, and it told the story from all different areas of the plaza where it happened. And it was just such a beautiful example of,
Well, it was interesting because I just watched, have you seen Wonder? It's the same thing where the kid that has like the deformity in his face. But anyway, they basically, all the people that are connected in his life, they show you their story from their perspective versus what the outside world is seeing. And it's so powerful because actually the girl that I found myself disliking the most in the beginning of the movie, when they told her story, I started crying the hardest. I was like, oh, I would have never known that's why she was being so shitty.
Yeah, that was a beautiful movie.
Oh, it was so phenomenal. I mean, it was phenomenal, the messages across the board, but I love that they did I'm going to show you behind the curtain of what's really going on and where this person's hurting. And it was so powerful because I was ready to hate one of the characters and be like, I am over her. And then I did her story and I found myself having such compassion for her.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a beautiful place for us to be able to get to. Right. We just have to start practicing it in real life with people who actually are in front of us irritating us. Yeah. There was a documentary out called The Red Pill. And have you heard of it?
I have heard of it. I have not seen it.
Fantastic. It's being accused of being a hate documentary. And I don't understand how people are making that leap. I would love it for somebody to explain to me because I don't see it. But Cassie J, it's her movie, her documentary, and she said in her TED Talk, we have to stop expecting to get offended. And I think we go into so many of our conversations. And I know I was guilty of it too. Like I'm a pro-choicer, and if I bumped up against somebody that was a pro-lifer, I would be waiting for them to say something that was going to piss me off so that I could tell them how it was. And as we get older, I think that maybe we get smarter and maybe that impulse is a little bit lessened. I don't know. But I was going
to say yes for people that choose to have awareness. Otherwise, I've actually seen the reverse. I had an uncle who passed many years ago and he was HIV positive and other things and, lived a different lifestyle than some people would be supportive of. And I found that his tolerance, he was one of the reasons he and I were so close is we had these conversations that really were wide open and we didn't have the same opinions on spirituality. We didn't have the same opinions we didn't agree on anything. We didn't agree politically. We didn't agree spiritually. We didn't agree. But we
Those are the best people.
Exactly. And we used to have really amazing conversations. And as he aged, he got more and more intolerant to them, to other people, to other ways of thinking, and everything was a judgment and everything was shut down. And I found that it was actually really challenging to continue to engage with him.
On how fringe you are.
Yes.
Right? Because if it's somebody who
That's
feels
a
like
good
they
point.
have been battling their whole life, I can understand how they just want people to get it.
Right.
And they're tired of trying to explain it. And to convert people who just aren't willing to see it. And yeah, we do get a little bit more curmudgeon-y, is that the word, as we get older?
That's a nice way of saying what I would say. He got a little, yes.
And I find too, like even with me, I think I do have growing intolerance with certain things. Like I am not willing to stand by and let somebody be nasty.
Right.
Like I have no tolerance for that. Whereas I was younger, I probably would have let it slide a little bit more. So on the one hand, my intolerance is increasing in things that don't serve us as humanity, but my tolerance is increasing when it comes to understanding other views.
Yeah, isn't that powerful? Because there are definitely things. I'm hardwiring. Every assessment test I've done is I am a person that when I feel there's an underdog or injustice, or especially when it comes to bullying and things, I have no tolerance. And I have to say I'm getting even more intolerance in those spaces, that I have to be the person that speaks up.
Yeah.
And yet finding that there's such a bigger growing tolerance around, and I'm not even sure tolerance is the right word, compassion and understanding to shift that perspective, because I still don't tolerate shitty behavior. I may have more understanding as to where it's coming from so that I can approach the conversation differently, but it's not that I tolerate that behavior or where that's coming from. It's I am more curious around where that's stemming from and where that's, how to perhaps redirect it or understand it myself so that I either can create necessary boundaries or walk away. Right. And, but there's this space of kind of almost creating a harmony between.
And it's like everything is that double-edged sword. Right. And so whether it's the #MeToo movement or whether it's our levels of tolerance, everything is a double-edged sword. So we can balance on that edge of the negative or positive on any of it. And we can move totally into intolerance, or we can understand that we have intolerance about something, speak to it, and then try to understand it.
Absolutely. And that's the interesting thing, right? Because then it's the yes and conversation instead of the yes but. And we always talk about your big buts getting in the way. We're so quick to say but, however, instead of saying yes and, so that everybody feels as if they have a space that they can be seen, heard, and valued to bring a perspective, because oftentimes the real truth is some variation in between the two very diabolical opposing perspectives. And so when you get into a space of and, you can start to see the spectrum and then come up with something that, because I don't like the whole word even compromise, because it always implies it's a half this, something has to go, instead of saying, how do we come to something that's going to be in the best interest of all?
To value,
the majority, right? And it's that value conversation.
And the interesting thing with that and but conversation is when we're using it well, it's extremely effective. When we're using and so that we can slide in our butt.
Well, yes. Well, I was going to say, and yes, you need to be very clear and intentional and open with the and. If the and is just because there is a way that your tone, it's just a variation of but, and you're being talked. Yes, it is. There is that, right? So, Alison, I'm curious because, man, this time goes fast.
Oh, my goodness.
I know, right? And I'm like I said, we could be in conversation all day. So I've absolutely loved this. And I want to make sure that before we close things out, that people that want to engage in this conversation with you, that are sitting here saying, okay, I want to learn more about my part. I want to learn more about the work that you're moving into. What is the best way that they can reach out and connect with you?
Probably email info@dominothinking.com.
Awesome.
I have a website, dominothinking.com, and social media, and you can definitely reach me there. But if it's something that you really want to specifically say to me, or ask me a question about, or whatever the case may be, and I do try to answer all of my emails. It's not always timely, but I do answer them, and because they're important to me, it's important to have that conversation.
It is important. So we will have all of that information for you in the show notes. Really, honestly, and just know that as I'm bringing in these amazing powerhouse guests like Alison, when they offer this space to engage in this conversation, please take them up on that opportunity, because they are global thought leaders who are out creating massive movements. And when they are opening up a space to really engage in a conversation because they want to have that conversation with you, I truly hope that you feel that and honor that and show up in a space to really take advantage of that, because that is such a gift. That is such an offering for Alison to say, email me directly. Email me so that we can really have a meaningful dialogue around whatever's showing up, or your questions or thoughts you might have, or your perspective. That's a wide open space for you to make a choice to show up as a leader and take that responsibility. So just thank you, because that is such a gift, and truly honor that you put that out for this community.
Thank you so much. Well, and please don't add me to your mailing list.
Yes, and I agree. Well, I will tell you, there's a whole, we need to have a whole nother show on that, around do's and don'ts around that, because you need to ask people's permission. She's offering a space to engage, but yes, it's not just to throw her on your email list, because that is not you stepping up and being a leader and respecting how someone is offering to engage with you. And so, with all of this and such a powerful conversation today, if we were to bring things full circle, is there something you want to leave this audience with as maybe a last thought, or a way to, kind of solidify and streamline insights that they can walk away from here? What might be that way that we can pull this through to close things out?
Well, I would just encourage people to start with first understanding where they're coming from, what is their part in it, and then try to really, really see the value of the person standing in front of you, value their experience, value their story, ask their story, but really show that that person in front of you matters. And this leads by example. People around you will start doing the same thing. If you want to be a good leader, start with your part and start valuing the people around you.
Love that. And, it so plays into everything we talk about on this show, which is all about how to say yes to yourself. And saying yes to yourself means that you have that intrinsic value to say you're worth having that conversation, that you're worth taking ownership of whatever has transpired in your life.
Yeah.
And the people around you are worth you giving your presence and giving them that compassion and that space to value them as human beings first. And so truly just deeply honored to have Alison join us today. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you all for continuing to show up and join us on this journey. I hope that you truly start to say yes to yourself, destroy the noise getting in the way, and realize that leadership is a choice. It is a choice in how you choose to step forward to show up, how you choose to serve others, and how you choose to take personal responsibility inside that space. Just know I'm sending you all heart-to-heart hugs. I love you, want to continue to hear from you. Please make sure you let us know how things are going, and then step forward so that you can be purposeful, passionate, and present in your life. We'll catch up with you next time.